favor?
Aye.
Move to item 3.1, which is a discussion of
Excuse me, too. Excuse me. Thank you.
Somehow we got out of order. Report. Would you like me to do my report
Maybe
first?
put that on the agenda.
Oh, sure.
On the agenda.
Let's go through your report first.
Yeah. Good evening, everyone. I hope everyone had a lovely Thanksgiving and acknowledge that two of our trustees were unable to join us this evening, but are certainly here with us in spirit. For the second year in a row, Mother Nature delivered some early winter weather for us. We're thankful that the last 2 days of weather certainly did not translate into experiences like we had last year. But we are thankful that everyone got to and from school safely the past 2 days. Tonight, I'm eager to discuss the revised dress code, which we'll get into shortly. And then I certainly want to tease the next board meeting where Ms. Stein is going to present an updated long-range financial plan for the district. When we think about things that are coming up down the road, we have 2 initiatives that are underway that are really designed to help increase safety in and around our schools. The first, on our campus, we are going to be introducing vaping detectors that are going to be used in our lavatories here in on our campus. We're going to be sending a letter outlining the specifics, and they'll be introduced to the students and staff. But simply stated, they're devices that are in we'll say undisclosed restrooms now, student restrooms, that detect changes in the moisture levels in a restroom and can determine whether a student is actually in the space vaping. They also reportedly can determine whether that vapor that is released into the air contains THC or not. So we'll be able to utilize that to hopefully dissuade our students from, 1, bringing these devices onto the campus, and 2, engaging in those similar activities down the road. So we look forward to introducing that all in an effort to protect our students' health and well-being. Additionally, in the next month, we're going to be introducing a new emergency alert system called Anonymous Alerts. This is a system that is app and web-based that allows anyone to be able to report anonymously incidents of concern. There's a variety of different categories one can choose from and then enter details. Categories include threats, weapon offenses, students that may be in danger from drug and alcohol abuse, bullying, and other instances. There will be defined hours that the system will be monitored. And during those hours, when one submits an anonymous alert, it'll go to the respective school's administration, who will be able to follow up and act in a timely manner. Outside of those hours, there'll be clear language in the app and on the web portal. There will also be buttons that'll be direct dial buttons to 911, to a substance abuse hotline, and a suicide prevention hotline that students or anyone can contact for guidance.
Oh, I'm sorry. So it's like a website-based button that goes to a phone line?
Yeah, well, so it would display the number if you're on a standard computer where you could dial it. But the vast majority of folks we anticipate will be accessing the tool, whether on the website or through an app, on a smartphone. So if you're on the website on a smartphone, you could hit simply a button that would do a direct dial to one of those services from a phone.
Thank you.
So we're eager to roll that out, and we see that happening in the next few weeks. There'll be communication that'll go district-wide to our students, staff, and parents. There'll be posters that'll be displayed in the schools and directions on how to download the app. The one item that I do want to mention is that this is completely anonymous on the school district side. The school will never receive information from someone's smartphone, the IP addresses. However, this is an effort to ensure the safety of our students and our school community. There won't be any kind of tolerance, though, for false reports. And anything that's determined a false report could be turned over to the police department for investigation. And I would presume that the police department then would be able to acquire, through their processes, if there were, say, false threats made or claims that were made that needed to be investigated, they could acquire more information from the provider, but none of that information is available to the school district.
Do we know other districts in our area that use
Oh,
this?
several, yeah. And I would say that there was just a situation within the last, I would say 3 weeks, I shared a news story with the board where there was a student that brought a gun to school that was reported through that. And then last school year in the spring, there were still 2 school shootings that were thwarted by anonymous reports through this application, where someone reported that particular students were in possession of weapons and had some really negative intentions. And when the police investigated, sure enough, they found students that had weapons in their home and had formulated plans. But more importantly, it is a tool that just not focuses on violence. It's an opportunity for someone to report if they're being bullied or think someone else is being bullied. If they're in need of some mental health assistance, if there's violence in a home, in a relationship, there'll be opportunities for that to be reported, and school personnel will be able to follow up accordingly.
Can I ask a question, or do you want to save a question?
Sit.
Can I ask a question? Or do you want me to save it?
Go ahead.
How does it differentiate between what's called like a real?
That'll have to be our determination based upon the follow-up. So with each prompt, there's one would enter the nature of an incident that you're reporting, the school that you're reporting it to, where the threat is, where the student is enrolled, and then there's an opportunity for you to enter some narrative details. And once received, our school administration and counselors, whomever, depending on the situation, would investigate. In speaking to a number of school districts that have employed this, whether in our region or those others that I spoke to at a conference when I first saw it, in the beginning, they said you may get a couple little hoaxes here, ranging from someone reporting something, and I'll go back old school a little bit to say that Bugs Bunny did something to somebody making a false claim, but they said those work their way out of the system pretty quickly, and it really turns into a resource to be able to support kids. So we're looking forward to introducing that. And then we're in winter concert season right now, so we encourage everyone to come out and witness the great talents of our students and staff. Our first concert is middle school, high school band concert, which is tomorrow night, 7:30 in the theater. We ask everyone to come out and join us, and that'll be followed by the orchestra and choral concerts in the coming week and a half. And then finally, as we know, the board approved a contract with Castle to support our work in the area of social emotional learning. And Dr. Kaur is actively planning for our visit on December 17th, where Castle representatives will be here in district, meeting with really a cross-section from students to staff to parents and administration and trustees, and we'll tour our schools. In the process, collecting a lot of other information as we discussed last time. And then weeks thereafter, we'll get a report that will inform our future planning in that area. So it's an exciting, busy time on that front. And Mr. Friedman, that's all I have this evening.
Thank you. Do you want committee reports, or do you want to go to dress code?
Your call. You want to do committee?
Well, wait,
Yeah.
out of order.
I know.
Yeah.
So we'll go back? Okay, so why don't we go back and talk about the before dress code?
So as the board and community is well aware, this year we have undertaken a real responsible effort to revise our dress code. We step back and we think about why would we want to do such a thing. First and foremost is the obvious, that it hasn't been reviewed in many, many years. And there's aspects of the language that's described in the current code that I would say is certainly quite dated in its approach. One referencing to undergarments being worn as outer garments, which makes me think back to the 90s when students, anyone was wearing boxer shorts as actual shorts, which I think was probably the reference there. But we also have the desire to remove gender-specific references. We want to reflect our current times and needs here in the school district. And we thought this was a great opportunity to provide voice from stakeholders and the broader school community. That said, I outlined a review process, and the first phase of that process was the development of a revised code, where we used models from local districts and other exemplars from around the region. The administration and Board of Education contributed to this effort. And then it was put out for a couple weeks for community feedback. And that feedback really took on a variety of different forms. And I'll get into some of the related data. We had a dress code committee, and you can see the representation 3 and 4 actually flipped there. And we collaborated on a couple different levels. We had a committee that was comprised, as you can see, I was present. We had 4 school administrators, 3 teachers, 2 trustees, 4 parents, and 5 high school students. Following what was a really passionate meeting, we had lots of good dialogue, suggestions that were made. I shared via Google Docs, and the committee then commented and provided their thoughts related to those revisions, which we will look at tonight. And then finally, we're looking at tonight's review in the hope that we'll be looking to adopt it at the next Board of Education meeting and notice and communication to the broader school community. That said, to get into the actual feedback, and I kind of want to frame all this for us too, is that this was not only pushed out through district newsletters and school-level communications, it was put on the high school class Facebook pages, and I directly emailed the link to the survey to every middle school student and every high school student. So there was tremendous opportunity for our students to get involved. We know that a number of our student leaders also, Michael, I see the effort that you're making. I have a red line copy that I'll hand you if you'd like.
That's all right.
That said, that when we think about this, we had 291 respondents. So we can say that there was a lot of feedback and a lot of data for us to go through. But in that process, we have to consider really the group that we had available to us. We had thousands of parents. We had hundreds of staff members. And we had well over 1,000 secondary students and, of course, elementary students that could have contributed. But you can see the representation was pretty well distributed. However, 291 doesn't represent a large sampling of that overall school community. That said, here is the existing dress code that I referenced earlier. Trustees all have a larger copy in front of them that could help review it. And the copy that was proposed that was distributed to the school community for the feedback. So that feedback, I can tell you that in going through this, I certainly had some understanding of what folks like K-12 Insight go through, and going through spreadsheets that were pages long and thinking that 291 people had a lot of different thoughts. So I completed a theme analysis, and certainly there wasn't statistical significance for us to consider, but there were trends that grew out of that. And simply stated, things that I brought to the committee's attention were similar comments or themes where there were greater than 4 responses out of the 291 responses that we received, and I provided some notable comments throughout the work that we did with the committee. So when we look at the feedback, one of the questions was, does the proposed dress code prohibit any attire that you feel is appropriate for school? So prohibit attire that you feel is appropriate. No, so this is pretty well split, 2 to 1. And I can tell you a large number of that 34% kind of fell into one category that we'll see in a moment. So that response was that hats or hoodies should be permitted. We had over 30 responses. I would say approximately 80% of those 30 responses were secondary students, and the other was a mix of secondary faculty and parents that thought head covering, hoodies, or hats should be permitted in school. And I shared some of the quotes as referenced before: remove limits on head covering, affect social and emotional well-being. There were some specific comments talking about kids that had anxiety challenges, that wearing a hat or a hood helped them to feel comfortable during those anxious moments. And then we thought that some said that the language referencing religious or cultural differences in the policy, while trying to be accepting and open, actually left us in a position where they felt we were singling people out. The proposed dress code, does it allow any attire that you feel is inappropriate? You can see there's much more agreement here. Almost 84% felt no, that it didn't, and 16% felt that it did. Here, the feedback really focused in a couple of general areas. The length of shorts and skirts should be appropriate. And I can tell you the committee really wrestled with how do you define what appropriate looks like, one. And two, from a staff standpoint, whether the administrators or teachers in the room, the comfort level in enforcing and actually policing that. So there was conversation about what I would say is like, it was an old school rule, something so many inches from the knee, or the length of the skirt or the pant leg. And I can tell you there wasn't one staff member in that room that wanted to use the ruler method, shall we say. A great deal of discomfort around that. Midriff should not be exposed regardless of gender, and there was specific reference to plunging necklines, which was referenced in the current code. Visible undergarments, there was some dispute about that, whether bra straps and or like underwear waistbands should be visible. And I can tell you some of the thinking that I think went to the permission of that was the fact that we didn't want to get into really policing things, understanding that someone could lean forward and you could see a little bit of a waistband, or a young lady or someone could be wearing a top that we may think is appropriate, but a bra strap could slip from the side, and we didn't see that as a concern. And then see-through clothing came up, and then I added, related to that, ripped jeans and pants exposing inappropriate areas was also mentioned. So some connection in that feedback. There were some areas where there were suggestions for clarification. One of the bullets that was listed in the proposed dress code: all clothing must have straps and fabric in the front, back, and on the sides. So I think that was trying to get at some of the things referenced in the prior slide, but we understood that it was kind of hard to actually describe what that might be, and then how would you enforce it once you described it. And then the other was looking at shoes must be worn at all times, what isn't permitted, appropriateness of flip-flops, and something like that was presented on two different lenses, one being a safety concern, and the other was something being too casual. So that said, we broke into 3 different work groups within the committee, and they reviewed these different categories, and you can trust that each of those groups was well represented amongst the staff, parents, and trustees. And I think it was a meeting that could have gone on for some hours beyond the time that we actually allotted. So the committee then came back with a number of suggestions. Each subgroup reported out, not only did they report out verbally, but they had a note taker that recorded documents in a Google Doc that was shared with me. And then I took those adjustments and kind of worked them into what you see before you as the revised dress code. So you have a clean copy in the presentation, and then another that does show the red line, but it's black and white, so you don't necessarily see the red. So essentially the first item that we're looking at is just kind of revisioning the introduction paragraph to be more positive. There was feeling that we could say the same thing, but using more positive language that was more supportive of students. Then the first bullet was actually stricken, which was that complicated item that all clothing must have straps and fabric in the front, back, and on the sides. Clothing must cover undergarments, bra straps excluded. Waistbands was deleted from that particular bullet. Then if we come down to the third bullet, there was some significant edits that were made there, where prior draft had this headwear as being prohibited. So the kind of the heart of that sentence was taken out, but it left the content that was in and around safety. Headwear must allow the face to be visible, not interfere with line of sight to any student or staff. And it deleted such as hats, hoodies, caps are not permitted unless for religious and medical purposes. And this was an area of great discussion. And we even had one of our students that was present that was wearing a hoodie that pulled it up over his head and said, is this a problem? And then he tightened it down to then is this a problem? And there was lots of modeling that went back and forth and great debate that went into this. And at the end of the day, there was conversation about really who do we want to be. There was really powerful dialogue about the message come to school like dress for success. And then dialogue that came from students that was saying whose job is it to teach us that? We should be encouraging kids to have that dialogue at home with their families. That's who I would turn to. And then there was discussion about, well, what about those students whose parents may not provide those examples or may not feel comfortable having that level of dialogue? At the end of the day, the committee recognized the challenges that were before us and thought it was an opportunity where some edits could be made. The following bullet, this we thought the edits here really encapsulated a lot of feedback in the discussion that took place during the course of the meeting. And here we made some edits. That clothing must be, you can see new language, functional for the environment and suitable for all school activities, included but not limited to physical education, athletics program, science labs, art, and other activities where unique hazards exist. So here there was discussion and thinking about, well, the cross-country team, you could see them out running, and as they're going down the aqueduct, there might be a couple male students without a shirt on, or a female student may be wearing a sports bra, and in that, bless you, in that environment, athletic competition, it may be seen as appropriate and permissible. However, wearing that in the school day or not wearing a shirt in school would not be acceptable. Hazards, there was really discussion in and around science lab and thinking about skin being exposed, and the concept, a lot of discussion around midriff, for example, and seeing how someone that had a bare midriff, how that could interfere with the process of learning, but not really that idea of someone evaluating what someone's clothing looked like. And then coming down to footwear, so before it said shoes must be worn at all times, it was edited to be footwear must be worn at all times and chosen with safety in mind. So saying that where it may be acceptable for a student to wear sandals in school, it may not be acceptable or safe for that to happen in a PE class. So that was, I think, the last of the suggestions that had been proposed by the committee. The additional requirements, there was a little bit of debate in and around that topic, but ultimately we found ourselves wordsmithing more than dealing with any of the actual language or requirements that are listed, and then the discipline related to dress code was deemed to be acceptable by the committee. So, trustees, the conversation is yours. Questions, I'd be glad to answer. Beth was present for the committee work and can share her experiences in some of the dialogue that we all engaged in that day.
Yeah, thank you. Maura was present but was unable to be present here today, and I know that you had intended to go. Maria wasn't able to attend. What I will say that was most interesting about it was how supportive of more progressive stance the staff was. So, for example, I had thought that the issue about headwear was going to mostly come from the students, but all instructional staff in the committee was extremely supportive of a less restrictive requirements on that. And that was very, very interesting to me. There was some discussion about AirPods being an issue within the context of that, but it seemed that everybody who was from staff in the room felt that it would be fairly reasonable, not even fairly reasonable, entirely reasonable, for that to be taken care of within the classrooms, that it was not a real concern of theirs. I will say that I don't know how this code it's now revised, is going to deal with the midriff question. It actually doesn't. So I don't know if anyone on the board wants to talk about that. The room had very spirited conversations about even granular aspects of this code, as the superintendent has described. But all in all, there was very strong, beyond consensus, like majority support of the idea that we had to move to a more progressive dress code. So I would say that would be a fair statement. So any questions would...
You define progressive.
Well, the previous dress code was not only, we weren't even talking about disparate discipline under the old dress code. The dress code itself, if you go back to, the original slide, was very gender-oriented and resulted in bad results. The other part, when I use the word progressive, has to do with the fact that many or most of the participants feel very strongly that dress is an expression of the student and that needs to be supported in the school community. I mean, certainly there is a huge spectrum of dress codes across the nation, going from extremely detailed with diagrams and, as we talked about, the ruler concept about exactly what you can or can't wear. Those do tend, however, to be in private schools or religious academies. And as you look in public schools, you're seeing a movement towards what I was referring to as a more progressive approach, in which the idea is that the student, with the parent or guardian, is making many of the decisions, and that the focus in the school community is really about health and safety and this important, it's actually a constitutional use of language, no substantial disruption of school activities. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
I have a couple of questions.
Go ahead.
The general questions. Great work. I love the process. I love the way the presentation walked through the steps of the process, the inclusiveness of it. I wondered about, I certainly would have loved to have been a fly on the wall for the bra straps excluded conversation, just because I would be interested to see where students push that and how it gets tested and used and whatnot, what's an incident of an accident versus an incident of fashion, et cetera. And the second one, can you define the minimum requirements of the dress code? So see-through garments must not be worn without appropriate coverage underneath to meet the minimum requirements of the dress code. What does that mean?
Maybe it's a little redundant with the subtitle, but I think we're saying that it must cover undergarments.
Period.
Reference there most directly, and that it falls into I think the second to last bullet, that it's functional for the environment and activities in which the students are engaged. The first, when we went through that process and so many eyes on that, we didn't have significant discussion about saying minimal requirements again of the dress code.
Yeah. I too had that question because I felt that the sentence, the first bullet that was initially in the proposed change, that kind of made sense with this bullet about see-through garments. So now that you've taken out that bullet, this kind of doesn't make sense anymore. I think it's vague. You're not saying what the minimum requirements are. I mean, that is what the headline is, but if, maybe if you move it. But I do want to say that unanimously, all clothing must have straps and fabric in the front, back, and on the sides was not supported by anyone on the committee.
I find that interesting. I mean, I am, for
Wait,
me,
Superintendent?
the proposed, what?
I just wanted to ask if Dr. Harrison agreed that received quite a lot of objection.
Because we had no way of defining it and exactly what that would mean and what we were attempting to accomplish by that.
Understood, I understand that. So I think this needs to be clarified a little bit more, because it doesn't make sense.
I think the presumption is, and maybe a connective something, because at the bottom it says administrative personnel have the authority to require students to change their attire if violates the dress code. So that presumes that that's the arbiter of whether it meets the minimum requirements.
See,
So-
but that's the whole thing. I thought the purpose, and maybe I'm wrong, the purpose of this is to set a minimum requirements, and if you leave it vague, then that is up for interpretation. I mean, personally, I wanted something that was more gender neutral with this dress code, which I think we do achieve. I understand that no one liked that first line, but the second bullet now does not make sense to me.
Well, also, I would just add, and I wanted to sort of ask the board about this because I was at the meeting, what I'm concerned about is, quite honestly, if clothing must only cover undergarments, then clothing could be de minimis to only cover undergarments, and I don't know that that is something that is an intended consequence of this code.
Right.
I know exactly what this means, right? What this means is I'm wearing sheer white stuff after Memorial Day, and you can see undergarments underneath, right? Like that happens. So this is saying that what this means to me is that then an administrative personnel or a teacher can say, hey, you need to wear a sweater around your waist because everybody can see your underwear, right? Like I've been in that situation before. That's what that means to me. When it says meets the minimum requirements of the dress code, I just think that sentence is just not necessarily necessary.
Yeah, it's almost as if see-through garments must not be worn without appropriate coverage underneath, period.
I would agree with that, too.
Ah.
I think that.
I would agree with that.
Yeah. I mean, because the presumption, this is working progressive, right? So
that was
it's
great.
working on a sense of community, right? Sort of not to use the word policing, but the idea that this is a framework that allows folks to sort of monitor each other, right, as a community in terms of how we present ourselves as dressed for success and what that means, right?
Right, and one of the students used an expression, he said, I think this was basically what he said, it's about your self-expression, not how that, unless it gets to a point where it's creating a health or safety issue, it's not how other people are perceiving your dress. Or I must state again, I think it's important, how do people feel about this midriff issue? Because that was sort of dangling at the end of our committee meeting. That was not really fully answered by the committee, and I think it probably, I have two ways of looking at this as a board member. One is that I do think, and I did not know that every student had gotten a direct email about the survey, and it's very helpful to know that. I personally am not aware of an additional amount of input we've had before this meeting, and to a certain extent, if we can get this dress code into, here we've removed, for example, this sentence, into a pretty good state, and we allow it to be open to more public comment before December 17th, which is when I think we're thinking about what we're going to do about it, we see how it works.
Well, if you look at the second to last bullet where it says clothing must be functional for the environment and suitable for all school activities, including but not limited to, Dr. Harrison, I think you alluded to the example of a student in phys ed who might be wearing a sports bra, right? That's going to be midriff bearing, but if they're pole vaulting, right, during gym or whatever you might be doing, it's okay. Again, administratively, you need to put something on. To go to ELA, right? I mean, again, I think it's less about rules and regulations, more about a framework from community. It's like the headwear. If you think about it, right? Like I get like people with the social emotional piece wearing the hoodie, the head, and the hair. The girls, boys with the hair. I remember my hair was always a disaster, and I wanted something on my head. Of course, my hat was backwards, but I couldn't wear the hat backwards, and there was rules everywhere. But these days, like the AirPods, like if you wear your hoodie on your head, you're walking around with your AirPods on.
Yeah, but somebody said at the committee meeting, if you have very long hair, or just even hair like mine, you could have your AirPods and you won't see it. Just saying.
That's true.
It was just pointed
I'm
out.
not sure one matters with the other.
Well, I think maybe that's a matter, I would sort of defer to the superintendent.
I don't know, it's a
Dr.
good-
Core, isn't that an issue of classroom administration at that
Well,
point?
so we said it was classroom management and the level of student engagement, that they could determine when a student was listening to music or not. And so it wasn't, that level of concern wasn't presented. And just as Beth had indicated, just as the young man was demonstrating with his hoodie, a young lady had her hair down and was having the same conversation. And someone with a hat, how if you had just a girl was wearing a woolen hat. And she said, well, if we're saying this hat would be okay, you couldn't see if I had them in then either. And it came down, teachers saying, in the administrators' room saying, it comes down to the level of engagement, and if a student is engaged in the work, we can determine if a child is listening or not.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I look at AirPods the same as certain things are fads, right? Like the spinners were fads. Certain things are, it's, AirPods. We've never said you can't wear headphones or anything like that. Was that in the original one? Because I don't remember that being listed.
No.
I feel like you can't anticipate for all these things, but I think that, like Dr. Harrison just said, that is something that would be managed within a classroom. Like anything else, if the kid brings anything, if the student brings anything into class that's disruptive.
In personal electronics, there's a policy that pertains to personal electronics and not being used properly in
Speaking
the
of wearable
classroom.
tech, right, so like, it's gonna be interesting how this evolves from here, even.
Yeah.
The third bullet point, headwear, dash, must allow the face. Everything else is like a sentence, and this one is like headwear, boom.
That just came out of the editing.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. If we just remove that dash, then it makes sense with everything
Yep.
else. By removing the first bullet point, the one thing that I feel like I need to bring up, because this was something that was brought to my attention by many parents. Again, I said, I hope you put this in, so not knowing what the exact feedback was. Parents were more concerned about if you don't say anything about the top, that, tube tops right now are fashionable. So kids coming into school with tube tops and, a little bit too revealing. It's not my thing, but I don't know if that, because people were very, very,
Yeah.
had very strong feelings about that, and they said they filled out the survey. Did it come out?
Right there.
there you
so
go.
There's the feedback, so it is acknowledged. The feedback is there. During the spirited conversation that Beth referenced, I made a suggestion about saying that the tops must cover one's torso. And that didn't last to this version. I don't think it made it at a committee, but I did propose that, bless you, and by saying that tops are shirts,
It's
it's
covered with
gender
functional.
neutral, it's referring to anybody, must cover one's torso. But then you get into,
What's a torso? I mean, we
But
use,
when you, like that bullet, though,
When you move, there's.
but the clothing must be functional for the environment.
well,
That covers, I mean, look, I can just tell you, as a male teacher, it's if I had a young lady in middle school, 8th grade, 9th grade, and we were, with a midriff bearing shirt, it's a very tough decision for me to make that approach and say something. I'd get a female colleague to go and have that conversation with the kid. There's a lot of
But
ramifications.
why
to
is
having-
that wrong? But now I'm playing devil's advocate.
Not a matter of whether it's right or wrong.
But
It's a
why?
matter of,
Because you live in an interesting cultural time, right? People, all of a sudden, that young female student makes an accusation that he was looking at my bare midriff. Why was he looking there to begin with? And that stuff happens. I wonder if that stuff came up in the conversation at all, with the sort of like, in terms of,
no, actually, the way that came up is that wouldn't you want to make sure that we're teaching our children about consent, so it's understood that you don't treat people in a way that makes them uncomfortable. It did not come up in the way that you're describing. I do think that this was the most uncomfortable part of the committee meeting because there were very strong feelings on both sides. So I have to say that I think is probably also reflected in the community at large. I mean, people feel very strongly on both sides of the spectrum. We did, I know Maria had shared with a number of, I guess with me and Maura, because we were on the committee, this Roanoke, Virginia diagram that shows you basically what coverage should look like, and it doesn't have inches or anything. There's a diagram of a gender neutral, I mean, I would be happy, in the interim before our next discussion of this to share it with the entire board, and maybe we can somehow make it Go ahead, Brian.
Because what I'm not
just- I'm
comfortable
saying-
with is that, using this midriff as an example, are we allowing it or are we not? Because,
It's allowed by this
It is
code.
allowed.
It's purely allowed based on the dress code.
okay,
I don't think there's any
And,
ambiguity.
and
Okay.
certainly the board can decide that that is not something that they're comfortable with for a dress code, right?
It's tricky.
And I would, 100%, it's your policy, you had plenty of opportunity for public comment.
Right.
And so we want to say from the survey to a committee, to the direct communication that I had with all of the students. Again, it came back to, I think the committee, there was this level of feedback, right? So we had 13 folks out of the 291 that had commented here. So we're looking at, so do the math on that,
5%.
right? So we're looking at 5% commented on that. And then there were numerous comments saying kind of, what does this mean? So it was an emotional, passionate discussion. So I could say it really came from teachers that were uncomfortable in how do I enforce this for any of the reasons that we've all lived through in this district, to references that David made, to simply just not knowing how to define it. So there's a place here, if we think it's appropriate to say that one's torso should be covered, we can simply insert that language. It was here, again, I gotta say, there was also a very personal level for some people that were in that committee for the discussion that made the conversation a little more challenging as well. So, we can certainly insert something here. This was for feedback, it's the board's policy. So if there is language that we feel envelops the spirit of what that that bullet was trying to convey, let's identify what that language is, and then we could certainly put it out, that idea, we can put it in the weekly newsletter. I don't know how much more feedback we get. There's a point to which we have to make a decision.
Touchy subject.
I mean, my suggestion is we've gone through now a lot of input that we leave it as is and let's see how it actually now gets implemented, how it plays out. I think as you start to get into more restrictions, I think most must be covered. Now, what about the shirt that, as you raise your hand, now, it's supposed to be, it starts to get
Just
very
where we
gray,
ended up
starts to be a lot
last
of
year.
problems. And, look, I think at the end of the day, there's a self-expression piece. I think that kids express in terms of wanting to dress how they're comfortable. I think, unfortunately, there's some onus on us as parents in terms of working with our children in terms of what is and what is not appropriate for school. And I think, part of it is, and maybe this is me, the father of two girls, you're thinking about, them trying to figure out something for themselves, what they're comfortable with and how they want to dress, and not be told you can or can't wear something, but them having to a dialogue between home and themselves, determining what makes them comfortable.
Look, I agree. I mean, I was looking for something that was more gender neutral. I know what my personal feelings are, but my personal feelings should not be, but as you said, it's people, raising their children and making certain decisions. Personally, I had certain rules, what is allowed in school, what's not allowed in school, but that's my own. I do like, overall, I do like this policy. I like that it's gender neutral, and I like that a lot of things have been taken out of this. My other problem is, I don't know, Michael, do you want to raise it? I could raise it, is the beginning part of this.
Okay.
How it has been rewritten, that first line. What does that say? What are we trying to say?
Should come to school dressed with a purpose. Right? So that how you come to school,
Okay.
how you dress,
A
should be
purpose?
with
Yeah.
a purpose, intentionality.
I like that sentence personally.
Oh, you do?
And
Very
it's
much.
addressed
Really?
to promote and engage in a positive learning environment. So
That's
you-
exactly, yeah.
So there's purpose to how you dress, and that you need to be considerate of what you wear and how it contributes, it impacts to the learning.
It says right off the bat, what the two of you just said,
Yeah.
that it's the parents' the parents take a part of this responsibility.
Right.
That's what that means, is that when kids leave their house, there should be an intentionality with how you come to school, dressed. Are you promoting to engage in a positive learning environment, not a positive social environment?
Right,
Yeah, but I have to
it-
tell
But
you.
can I
that-
ask you guys, I'm just sorry, if you take this apart, it makes it easier. And you put proposed dress code preamble next to suggested committee revisions to the proposed dress code. But look at, just proposed dress code, I don't think anyone had a problem with it. That's the one that was considered to be negative, right?
Uh-huh.
So the main difference is the first sentence. Does everyone agree with that?
Yeah.
It's the first, so that's the sentence that's concerning.
But that's still, that spirit of, that's still in the second sentence. The second sentence says the primary responsibility for this resides with the student and
Yes.
parents or guardians.
Right.
Could we
Personally,
simplify
I
the
don't have
sentence?
a problem with
I
saying,
think we should go to that place.
the overarching goal of the dress code in terms of showing up to school, promoting a positive environment. You can't show up with a T-shirt that has offensive language on it, or that promotes,
But I think the
That's the
proposed
hostile
dress
and
code,
intimidating
the
atmosphere.
beginning sentence, says exactly that, and it's more simply stated.
I have to say I concur. I liked the preamble to the proposed, but I understand, so I.
The essence is the essence.
But I think you could simplify this first sentence. I think it's a little too wordy. So would it be essentially the same to say that the district believes that learners' dress should support a positive learning environment and take out half that sentence? I got busy trying to dissect
Yeah.
the sentence. Can we simplify it?
Okay, we're simplifying it as long as it's that piece of the primary responsibility.
That
No,
sentence
no,
is
that,
less-
the primary responsibility.
So
says that.
I'm suggesting it reads, the Board of Education of the Irvington Union Free School District believes that learners' dress should support a positive learning environment.
The thing is, I think the word intention, I'm not gonna, and I'm okay wherever this lands, by the way. I just think the word intentionality is an important word, because it's sending a message that when you need to be intentional about how you start your day, by putting, it's the first thing you do in the morning.
But by saying you're
Maybe.
promoting it, you're promoting that it's supposed to promote a positive learning environment. I agree with Michael. I think that
You can
this
simplify it
sentence
for
is
sure.
No,
very
that's good.
complicated,
Okay.
and it makes people think, and when you start to think, it's not clear to people.
Well, if we took what Michael recommended, and we kept intentionality, would it read believes that there should be
Yeah.
intentionality with how learners dress to support a positive learning?
Or learners dress with the intention to support a positive learning environment.
Oh,
There's definitely a way to simplify it.
Yeah.
I don't feel strongly, one way or another, but, I do think, as Dave said, the intentionality piece conveys a message. At the end of the day, all you have to do is comply with the minimum requirements. At the end of the day, that's all you have to do. But I think the preamble sets out, a aspirational goal for the dress code that, I think we'd like people to achieve. But at the same time, at the end of the day, as long as you fulfill these bullets, you're good.
yeah, I mean, it's interesting, because there was a time when we changed the nutritional standards for what could be served on throughout the campuses. And I remember there were parents who were very concerned because they felt that the school was providing too many requirements about what people could or could not eat. But in that context, we were providing the very healthy food, right? And if you wanted to send your kids to, you weren't saying don't send your kids to school with, I don't know what, a Twinkie in your lunchbox. We were saying we're not going to serve your child Twinkies because this is a best practice. So if the board feels that a gender-neutral, open, I don't know how to put it, learner-oriented, expression-oriented dress code reflects what we want for the district, then it does again, just like you do or do not put Twinkies in a lunchbox, you do or do not send your child of any gender to school, perhaps with a tube top.
I have comments on that, but I do want to just finish this one sentence at the start. So could we maybe, what if it was the Board of Education of the Irvington Union Free School District believes that learners should dress with the intention of a positive learning environment?
Should dress, should dress, should dress.
But
But
it's
simpler.
less complicated.
With the intention, should dress with the intention to support a positive
Or
learning.
promote.
Yeah, that's very nice.
Or we
Like
could say,
that.
dress in a manner that promotes positive learning environments.
I think Maria felt it promotes that intentionality. I think everyone likes intentionality better than promotion. Right?
No, I just think overall, I didn't care one way or another, I just think the way the,
Want it with intention or with promote?
Well, the way I said it is learners
The way you
should
said it,
dress
perfect.
with the intention to promote a positive.
To promote.
I thought with the way you
Okay, there we
edited
go.
it just there was
To
perfect.
promote and engage.
yeah.
Sure.
To promote and engage in.
I think taking away the ality part changes the tone of the sentence, right?
It does.
At the end of the
It
day.
does. Yeah,
I
thank
think
you,
that's what you're
Michael.
struggling with. We're all
Dress with intentionality that promotes.
Active voice.
No,
No, just no ality.
Learners should dress with the intention to promote and engage in a. The word is intention, not intentionality. So back to the point that has been discussed and that you were circling back to, Beth. I just saw in the middle school email that goes out weekly, the reminder that comes up every year about parties in which large numbers of students are invited and receive a party favor such as a sweater, and the issue that creates for some other students when the next day if a large number of students show up with a sweater and those who weren't a part of it, and how that makes them feel. So in the way that that's been handled, we don't tell the parents, don't let your kid wear that sweater the next day, but we explain the context that creates for other students, and then ask them to address that with their own family and their own students. I wonder if essentially we have this proposed dress code, but I liked what you had shared about this other dress code. If we provide some sense of generally this is what we're going for, but we're not. This is not a requirement, and certainly there's exceptions where, which we know of. Sometimes you see the band of underwear, sometimes you see the bra underneath the shirt. We're not trying to get gotchas here, but we're going for essentially torso and legs, and you can provide a diagram, so it's not about inches, but so regardless of body type, it's
Yeah,
still.
yeah. But I have a question then, just procedurally. If we're going to share that, so it's the Roanoke thing, how do we take care of it? Because it is a public meeting, and it would be, I'm not going to share it right now because it would be passing it on my phone. Who would I send it to so we can sort of put it up with our minutes or something? Because we're having this conversation. This makes sense to anyone who's watching
Well,
this.
it goes back to a committee or to the
You-
coordination
I
of
mean,
the
look,
superintendent.
yeah, and you could easily Google it, quite honestly. I mean, I
Okay.
did.
All right.
And by the way, that's why that first bullet point of the proposed, all clothing must have straps, fabric, front, back, and on the sides. That makes more sense if you had the diagram.
Okay, I'm going to bring it up now.
Yeah.
Because we are all here.
And rather than as a rule,
It's a guideline.
It's a guideline.
Right. Because,
Right, just like
like
we
you
write-
just gave the example of.
Oh, here it is.
Of
The sweaters,
party
white
wear
sweaters,
and
yeah.
stuff like that. That's exactly right. Some parents let their children pick, and other parents said, no, you're not allowed. And I think that is part of this conversation with students and parents. And we say it at the beginning, the primary responsibility resides with students and parents.
That doesn't make sense.
And that guideline provides a talking point for those families to discuss. This is more or less what the school district, the intention is. And if you're going to push the boundaries, you're going to push the boundaries, but you at least know what the intent is.
So how do we separate what's policy versus what's a guideline?
Well, I think, all the time we have, following the policy, you have an addendum, and that references the guideline.
So
So the policy points
But
to.
aren't
to an addendum.
policies also guidelines?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, so
it is.
we're writing it in here, so it's policy, I guess is what I'm saying.
Right.
So
Yeah, but-
we're gonna-
And this is what guides,
You see, but that's the thing, I don't, that now we're adding something to the policy which is going beyond where the committee landed, and that's my concern. If it's purely a guideline, that's one thing, but if it's part of the policy, because in looking at, even the Roanoke diagram, just for 15 seconds, I'm not exactly sure how clear that diagram is.
oh, look, I'm very, with these changes that we've discussed tonight, I am very happy and pleased with this policy.
Yeah, I
with
mean, I have a
these
couple of
changes.
wordsmiths in addition to, I want to continue with this, but I think with the footwear bullet point, for me, I'm not sure, you do such a good job above with clothing of describing what safety we should keep in mind. So I'm wondering why we don't write, clothing and footwear must be functional for the environment, suitable for all school activities, blah, 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 because then we are providing similar context for both footwear and clothing.
I think the conversation we had there is that it was stated there. It was already stated things had to be functional, that footwear needed to be called out, and it was just trying to differentiate that point that I made, that, a sandal may be appropriate to walk through the halls, but it's not appropriate for PE.
And also there was the developmental issue, the teachers and administrators in, let's say, K through 3 definitely were very concerned about, shoes that you can walk in safely in high school are not safe.
I'd be honest with you, just as I'm good wherever this lands either way, but I just think it's worth talking about. I was a Birkenstock kid in college, for sure. I'm not sure open toes are okay in the classroom. That jives against, intentionally becoming the dress professor, does it? I don't know. What if some teachers are grossed out by open-toed shoes with guys wearing sand? I'm just saying, where does this,
I'm sorry,
Yeah,
that's the teacher's problem.
Yeah, Ms. Hill.
Okay, if that's the case,
Ms. Hill will have to get over it.
too bad.
I also think, the only reason why I also think that you need to call it out as a separate bullet point is because you're calling out, this is just my feeling, that footwear must be worn.
Unlike clothing.
I like the way it's
Well,
written. It's written just fine.
That's true, you're right, you're right.
Yeah, I like clothing.
Well, I can tell you, I can think of a number of times within being in Irvington, let alone my entire career, where you've seen kids take off at recess and are running in the grass with no shoes on, and walking through young lady, someone takes off their shoe, because then we'll sit there in class with a shoe off, because their feet hurt. There's incidents where I can see.
That's my question.
Well, that's a great example. I know all sorts of
I forgot
athletes
about
whose
that.
feet are very sore at this point with the beginning of the season. Are we saying that they're not able to provide any sort of relief to their feet during this time?
What happens?
That's
if-
why they wear the slides with the socks on.
But what happens if we have an open campus, right? So what happens if there's a broken bottle up there, and someone does that and slices their foot open? Does this, I'm just saying, what happens if that happens, slices their foot open? Does that protect us? They want to sue the school district now.
Well, that's
because-
why we say footwear's.
No, but the sandals are not going to protect you.
No, it doesn't. So that would get into a
Yeah,
whole
just-
other
yeah.
category of saying that you can't have open-toe shoes.
I know, I'm fine with the way it's
Pick
written.
on that
I am
conversation.
not quibbling, to be
I'd
clear, with the
like-
way it's written. I'm okay with it.
At this point.
I'm just thinking about it.
But, wait,
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to ask something else based on what Maria was asking about guideline policy. I just want to take everyone back down to discipline related to dress code violations. So in the first sentence, we say administrative personnel have the authority to require a student to change their attire if it violates this dress code. But then we say students who do not adhere to these guidelines will not be attended to attend class. And my comment is that I want to make sure that that second sentence doesn't result, or unless this is the intent, of a classroom teacher saying you can't be in my classroom with those clothes on. That's what I'm concerned about.
You mean if it violates it?
Yeah, because aside from gender neutrality, one of the issues was to avoid unnecessary absence from classroom learning. So I don't know, like, how it is that, this seems like the, this, I wonder if this goes actually into our discipline policy and away from our dress code policy?
Well, it may, I would say, I don't know that we can point to enough situations where we could say that kids are missing class because they're in dress code situations. But the one, I would say maybe to play devil's advocate with that second sentence in that section, what if a student walked into class with a hate message on their T-shirt?
Right.
Right, but that's easy.
You're not gonna permit that child to be in your classroom.
Right.
If they're not
But
changing,
going to
I
what
mean-
Beth was saying, I think the second sentence should be revised to say that students who adhere to these minimum and additional requirements will not be allowed. That's really,
But isn't that what it says? Students who not adhere to these guidelines will
That
not.
we refer to as
Exactly what it
requirements
says.
versus guidelines.
yeah, nowhere in this document we can say guidelines, it's all requirements.
Yeah.
Oh, right,
So it
that's,
should say
right,
requirements.
right.
There we
Thank you,
go.
Mr. Lawyer.
Thank you, Brian.
Yeah, good point.
That was a good close read.
I mean, isn't the issue, though, of, that we've run into is the administrative personnel requiring students to change their attire? I mean, maybe, I guess the question is, would it be perhaps better just to straight away reach out to the parents when there's an issue, rather than having them?
Right, but if someone walks into a class with a blatantly offensive message
Right.
on their T-shirt, they're going to be told you can't come to class, or you have to put a shirt over that covers it.
Right.
Right, so administrative personnel, I guess you were, I think you're referencing the second sentence, I'm talking about the first. So I'm just saying, shouldn't we tie in that,
Well, to
that-
me,
that-
that's.
that it shouldn't be, that the parents should be called, not will be called if.
Well, no, because to me, what if the parent is, to me, this is the easiest one, it's minimal outside of the classroom. If you are wearing something that's offensive, and I could easily give you a sweatshirt that covers that up and gets you back into class, that is the quickest way of getting you back into class, as
Yeah,
opposed
but
to
the
calling the
last 3 years in a
parents.
row where this has surfaced to a level we're aware of is because the administrator has asked the students to change.
Right, but that wasn't
Without
because of
reaching out to the
a.
Wait, so Michael, you want will to be should?
For terms that aren't covered in this any longer.
Yeah.
What I will say is that that if someone violates the dress code like that, parents should be called, right? So
It
either
depends on the
way.
extent of what the violation is. So there's a place that's where especially when we're thinking of our older students, we want them to take ownership of this, and that every time that a child has a conversation where a teacher's redirecting them, or there's a learning moment in and around their conduct or something, teacher or an administrator doesn't pick up the phone and call the parent every single time. Teachers have conversations with kids all day long, administrators all day long, and there's a point to it where you're trying to coach kids to make responsible decisions for themselves. So I think that you create the space for a kid to have ownership, to correct or remedy what the situation is, and then if unsuccessful, that's when you engage the parents. It's just like my behavior in the classroom. I'm talking out of turn. You're going to remind the child a number of times until the conduct doesn't change, and then you engage the parents. I think it's parallel to other.
Well, this is, well, I was just gonna say, because it says administrative personnel have the authority, Michael just pointed out, therefore, then if a teacher spots a kid with an inappropriate shirt on with a message that's no good, they then have to call an administrator, and the administrator then has to come and do
Yeah,
that?
they send them to the office, and then they deal with it.
Well, then you need to take, I think, not to go, I know we're going into wordsmith land. You take second sentence and you put students who do not adhere to these guidelines will not be allowed to attend class. Second sentence, administrative personnel have the authority to require students to change their attire if it violates the dress code.
Well, shouldn't it be students who do not adhere to these requirements will be referred to administrative personnel who have the authority to require students to change
No,
their attire?
I think that the clear rules that you're not allowed in the classroom, so that way the teacher can say, you are wearing something that has an offensive message, go to the office, and then the administrators take over and either say, do you have another shirt in your locker, or put on the sweatshirt, those are your options.
I think you just confirmed what I said.
Yeah, you just said what Michael said.
Right, but I don't see how, I think the language as it is
Well,
It's progressive.
deals with that. That's what I'm not understanding, what we're going to change.
Well, this starts with administrative personnel, so.
So you're
If it's
saying,
if it's progressive, it should be written progressively.
so in other words, the students who do not adhere to this the first step is
to these
they're,
requirements.
Not allowed to come into the
they're not
classroom.
allowed to come into the classroom, and then the administrative
Yeah.
personnel.
I think we're getting to
Yeah.
a different place than what's intended. The idea that the
Not wordsmithing, it's the actual way in which this comes across. If it's progressive, it should be written progressively. It's not wordsmithing.
You mean progressively like the order of what will happen? Yeah, we're not talking about being progressive, just in case anyone's, I understand what Michael's saying. So Michael, I think, came up with a sentence that does it. Do you remember what you said?
No, he's just saying flip
flip
the
the order.
sentences.
That's
Flip
what-
the order,
right.
that's all.
Student sentence first, administrative personnel sentence second, yes? Okay. With the change of guidelines to requirements as
makes
suggested by
complete sense.
Brian.
Yeah.
The last bullet point of the additional requirements, I think, just a grammar thing, this is wordsmithing. Clothing including with gang identifiers, I think we need to add the word with.
Oh, but a gang identifier can be a piece of clothing, like,
Like a bandana
Yeah.
or,
Yeah.
yeah.
yeah, that's why it's, that's how it works.
It's like the old spike bracelets, remember that?
No.
You don't remember the old spike bracelet? That's, they used to be in school, they used to take them from me, because it could hurt somebody else.
But it still would be, a bandana is not
Can't hurt
band,
you.
it's a bandana with a gang.
No, sometimes it's colors,
Color of the
bandanas
day.
mean colors.
Red, blues, and different
Well,
colors.
Right.
Yeah, like, actually, cops do it too, but not as gang identifiers. It's like your color of the day identifies you as being undercover.
What they do, you usually,
I defer to your
if you go to a
expertise.
school and all seven, like, there's a whole crew of people with red sweatshirts on, there's something happening.
Yeah.
Not good
Yeah.
with the blood. And the blues, the Crips, and
Yeah.
the whole thing.
Right, okay.
Gotcha.
We're hoping we're not at a point where this is gonna become an issue in this district.
I defer to you on that.
Okay.
And if you want the extra slightly confusing footwear bullet point, go for it. And I do think, though, that I think it's a mistake to see what happens, and I think that we're making a mistake by not offering some guidelines. These are requirements, and that helps by clarifying what our guidelines, by our requirements. But if we add guidelines, I think we would be helping families and students to have the conversation.
Is it possible? Well, is it,
We were talking about the image.
yeah, but is it possible outside of this, on the district website, somewhere, I don't know, in a way to do that? Sure.
Well, here's something,
It's not enforceable, so it's a
But again,
resource.
it's not meant to be enforced, it's meant to be a guideline for
Supporting
discussion.
parents in being, because,
well,
well, Michael, I just wanted to,
Go
because my.
ahead.
What do you do with it then, and when does it
Well,
become a-
because if the whole point of this is to say at the very beginning that the primary responsibility for this resides with students and parents, the guardians, right? It's like, telling a kid he needs to be able to tie his shoe. You gotta tie your shoe, kid, but the kid doesn't know how to tie his shoe. Nobody ever taught him to tie shoes. There are parents who don't necessarily, heed this kind of stuff or don't pay attention to this kind of stuff. So there needs to be something that helps them, because otherwise they can always say, well, how am I supposed to know what that means?
Well, I can give
No.
you a suggestion. I keep going back to the nutrition metaphor for something that happened earlier in this district. So just like we do in the district newsletters, have reminders sometimes from each building, here's a healthy snack list that you can provide to
That's the equivalent, yep.
Yeah.
Or even how to use a certain web function.
So I would be glad to collaborate with someone on developing something like that.
Yeah, and then it could be up to the administrators of each building and their staff to decide if they want that to be something associated with their building. But then we're not telling them.
See, but,
So you see that, that's how now we're getting into middle school has
No, but
one
it
set
could
of
come-
expectations, the high school has a different set, and
But-
that's.
but-
it
Oh,
does-
but the
there's
committee,
Oh.
oh,
Websites that talk about all this stuff.
wait, Brian, I just want to say that the committee was very clear that every building has its own developmental issues. Like when we talked about the shoes, that was part of it. And similarly, with the dress code, there was some conversation that we know, for example, like, you may have a contract with your classroom teacher about what's appropriate for that classroom.
Right.
So,
That, I.
But they should
I-
still
that
fall
I
under
get.
school rules.
But when you start saying that here's a resource of how you should dress, and it's up to the building administrator to do that, you get back to the same
Then I feel
issue
like-
of.
Oh, no. Oh, I meant more like, hi, summer's coming, and you may be wondering about healthy clothing choices.
It's meant to support parents, I think, more than anything.
Yeah.
The support for
I'll be
parents
honest, and I
discussion.
really
Yes.
feel like this would be a great thing in the next time, whoever's the PTA liaison, just down with the PTS, because I know for a fact on the website, on the national PTS, there's all kinds of stuff in regards to things like that. Like,
I don't think it's,
there are.
It's not part of policy.
it's not a.
No.
Part of policy.
No. I think the point is not whether it's policy or not, I think it's that it gets addressed.
Yeah.
Because if we're gonna make a policy that we're saying that the primary responsibility is with parents, and parents don't have a clue, they just moved here from somewhere else, there's different customs or cultures or whatever it might be. Like if I come from Pakistan and I wear a burqa, it says here that I have to wear, my face must be visible. But a burqa, my face is not visible,
But it,
right?
oh, I thought we,
I'm not trying
we
to open
deleted
that
that
up.
language?
But I'm just saying,
No, headwear must allow the face to be visible, so he's, that's in the new language, that's in the code that we're really getting very close to, approving. It does say must allow the face to be visible, so Dave is saying if you came from Afghanistan, not Pakistan, yeah.
burqas in Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, wherever.
Well, it depends.
Wherever burqas-
Let's just say if you believe culturally in covering your face, I think that then we will have to have a conversation about
And I
that.
think it will, because it addresses religious, right, in another line. The point again is.
No, but
No,
but
we are
we
not
deleted
reject-
that, which is a good point. We deleted
No, it
that.
says right here,
No,
yeah, because clothing,
Must allow the eyes to be visible.
No, I think the exception should be,
Religious affiliation.
that's about
Wherever.
being hostile. It used to be that we said you couldn't wear headwear unless there was a religious or health exemption, but the committee found
oh, that it would be, right. I saw
that
the
was
feedback,
singling
right.
people out, right? So when you go to the second group, additional requirements, that's not about not
Was anybody
harassing.
on that committee I mean, it's a very good point of view, and I applaud that kind of thinking for sure, but was there anybody in that group that could attest to that?
Well, he's wondering about,
Like, there was only 241 people who responded to the survey out of thousands of people. So I'm just saying, like, if the people who, there was how many people? Can you go back to that slide?
no, but.
No, but how many
no,
people?
but don't forget, there are teachers that were on that committee, administrators, who worked with students for years, who have a lot of
I think the overarching
knowledge.
point is that, at least the point that I'm hearing Michael say, is that the parent may or may not understand what this means.
Right.
And again, I don't necessarily think it's something that's for us to do. I do think it's something that should be brought up with a PTSA conversation.
But that's not part of the policy.
No.
What Chris offered is to work with some people, and it could be a couple of us as well as administrators.
Okay. But
Yeah, for now, we move on from this, and there's a separate group that wants to look at a probably a resource which would be outside of the policy.
Right.
review section.
Going forward, these changes will be made, and then are we going to,
Board would adopt them, and once they're adopted, it would be integrated into, through the adoption, what it would be a revision of the code of conduct where this lies, so that you would re-adopt the entire code of conduct, and then we would, the next school day would be effective.
but are we
following
going to
those.
share these changes with the community between now and for further feedback before the adoption, or no?
I don't
This
know
is-
how much further one
Okay.
would go. I think we
No, I'm
provided
just
some-
trying to get clarity.
Yeah,
on
it's
the next
scheduled for
steps.
It's a
December
decision to be made.
17. We could, I don't know if someone can help me with the next meeting after December 17th, is January.
January, the round.
I mean,
First week of January, first
if we
full-
wanted to put it on to discuss it instead of December 17th, we could, I suppose, I don't know procedures to vote on that, just to allow the extra time for the information to percolate.
I mean, this has been out there for
Yeah,
a
it's
while.
been out there.
Since the summer.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I don't
The
see,
spring.
I don't see these changes being real substantive changes. I think they're
Yeah.
good changes, but I think at this point, we'll secure on our next agenda as such, and I think the community has had a fair amount of time with this, and I think we can try to move
And
forward.
from the district newsletters, like following a board meeting, we always do a recap of the prior meeting. We'd have a link to this and a separate link to the proposed dress code.
Great, okay.
that the board will adopt on the,
And then,
so
yeah.
it's
I'm not in
giving
favor of
notice.
delaying this anymore.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I mean, what we actually settled on was not that huge a difference.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's move on to our committee reports.
Well, curriculum committee didn't meet.
Right.
So-
That's easy.
In B and G, we had a meeting after our committee meeting, which we have to, we haven't had a B and G meeting.
That's something
That, I think we had a,
No, there was one.
It was one, no, there was one, it was, no, it hasn't been since our last meeting. There hasn't been one since.
Right,
Okay.
exactly.
Right.
so
Right,
we're
yeah.
checked on that one.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Booster Club is the business as usual, working very hard to support Irvington athletics.
Okay.
Any news?
No new initiatives.
The communications, the two people who attended aren't here tonight. I don't know if you have some updates.
Actually, there was only one person that attended the meeting, and besides myself. And we actually talked through some feedback that we got from our communications consultant related to some possible next steps related to digging deeper into communication feedback that we've gotten from the community. So we'll take that up at the next discussion. We also had some initial conversations related to the possibility of an Instagram account.
For the district.
Okay.
Okay.
Liaison assignments, board groups, anything to report?
I think there needs to be one produced for this one.
Okay. CAB?
No. Nothing for the last meeting.
But we didn't report that, the last meeting was a day, it was when we report. So,
Oh, you're right, okay.
you did P and G there, but not all things at the last.
Right,
meeting.
right.
That was something to say there.
CAB, it was a lot of updates on some of the initiatives, feedback from the homecoming and the pledges that the students signed off and the, what do they call it, that you put on the back of the phone to hold credit cards and stuff, the giveaways if you
Yeah.
made the pledges. It was Red Ribbon Week. Some things that the kids are planning is another dodgeball, bringing various communities together. The kids who went to the summer leadership, youth to youth, they brought back, there were some things that they participated there and that they want to bring back here, and they're working with other students from the river towns, and they're trying to find a location for the event, and they're working with Carolina. No date on
No,
that.
thanks.
Nothing has been, other than it's hopefully going to be in the spring.
Great.
And at the next CAB meeting, there was discussion about, they're bringing these two gentlemen back who is going to be presenting to the group. They presented last year to the group, and while the students really did react to them in a positive way, they were a little green, and they were new to presenting to students and their message, and it was a little unclear as to their messaging. So they've kind of been working with Allison and Tanya and other people like that in other communities, trying to refine their presentation, but pretty powerful. I thought they connected with the students. And I think that was.
And the only other exciting news is that the IAS
Oh,
grant
the
was
IS,
renewed
oh,
for
that's
another 5
huge
years.
news.
Very,
Right, I forgot
just-
about that.
Just a little
Yeah,
tidbit there.
Yeah, just a little tidbit.
another,
625?
What?
625,000 or 525?
Yep, 125,000 a year. Yep.
I can,
Anything
for
from
Westchester,
CIF?
no.
What?
No. Some great grant discussion.
can donate to them today. The Westchester Putnam School Board Association has a few events coming up. This Thursday, they have an Advocacy 101. So for those who are on school boards who are interested in learning about improving their ability to be advocates for our public schools. It's a great opportunity. And then just sort of a reminder of the upcoming cycle of what's happening in terms of state funding. December is usually the time frame now through, well, we're in December. November, December is the time frame in which the governor is typically developing recommendations for the budget, and clearly Medicare and healthcare and education are the two big pieces of the state budget. You might be reporting that there's a big hole in the budget this year for around healthcare. But students don't get to skip out on a year of education, so we need the funding regardless of what the other circumstances of the state are. So public school advocates will be out there pushing to make sure that schools across the state get the funding they need. And so usually the governor comes out with his presentation of the budget in January. Subsequent to that, on January 30th, school board members have the opportunity to meet with, as do superintendents, with our area legislators and talk about that budget proposal. So that's always been a really important opportunity to hear from legislators and to share with them concerns and facts that legislators can take with them to Albany to advocate for our schools. So that's another big event coming up. And one other thing too, I just got a note from West Putt. One of our members participated in an event there around safety and security funding, and there were a lot of professionals. There were professionals there representing implementing school safety officers and architects representing hardening of schools. So it was great that our membership, our superintendents, and members of West Putt were there to advocate also for mental health as a voice at the table.
Very good.
Very good.
Thank you. And then one other update, periodically, the leadership of the Quad Villages school boards get together to talk informally about what's going on in our district. So Maura and I had breakfast with leadership of Hastings and Ardsley 2 weekends ago to talk. Seems like obviously Hastings is going through their own capital project, so there was some discussion about that and how that's going in their community. I would say, the 2 high-level takeaways, or maybe 3, that everyone is focused on is it seems like everyone is looking at potential master schedule changes in their districts, and alongside that, there's interest in our district in terms of looking at the start times of
Right.
schools.
Yes.
Alongside that, there's a lot of discussion in terms of athletics and how it works, and chicken and egg, and don't have to be the first mover. So there was, that's being talked about in our neighboring districts as well. And then there was also some discussion about transportation costs and the challenges around that.
Just as a follow-up to that, it's been slow going, but West Putt has had a committee around school start times that's trying to get that conversation generated. And I've also taken the opportunity to look at a few other school districts. I recently saw, for example, Scarsdale was also bringing up this idea of school start times. So it is a question of somebody's got to rev that engine, and it seems like it's a regional conversation.
So that's it for our updates. Seeing no community members here, bless you. We'll move to 5.1 and move to 6.1, which is the consent agenda. Any questions before we move to the consent agenda?
I did around the treasurer's report.
Yeah, I think we'll get that the next meeting part of the long-range financial plan.
Okay, I guess I see this treasurer's report as just a small moment in time versus a long-term planning. What's interesting for those who look at the treasurer's report are a couple of things. One, that something we've referenced before, but we see it with this treasurer's report that the district doesn't get funding till quite late in the year, and that you'll see the prior total in terms of our revenue was quite low, and then we received that funding. So that's interesting to see when we use it. But then additionally,
as a board, we go through a process with our administrative colleagues of developing a budget and approving that budget. But I think this treasurer's report reflects some shifts regarding the certain realities of different components of that budget. If you think that those components will be reflected in that conversation, I'm happy to wait for the next meeting, but I think it's just a brief update, perhaps, that some aspects of.
So what, you have a particular question about the treasurer's report that I can answer, or?
Sure, if it wasn't shared with you, I can certainly share my couple of questions. Hold on a second.
But I'm not sure if I was prepared to address it today, so I was suggesting you do my comment.
Okay.
I was going through surgery, you get a chance to.
I see.
to-
Oh, sorry.
to-
Got it.
to
Yeah,
review the formula.
basically, I noticed that, certain areas of the budget have shifted from the approved to what's now the actual, so around like tax certs and a few others where there was, big shifts from what was originally budgeted to, and,
For tax certs, Michael, we actually are over budget right now, so we have to move money from our reserve. So that negative number there on the treasurer's report of 300 and, I don't think it's larger, 330 something thousand, needs to have an amendment, a budget, called a budget amendment. So we do that, typically twice a year, once in like maybe January, February, and then once again in June. And we pull money in from the reserves.
yeah.
So that's why that's negative.
The other areas were building repair, technology, and insurance.
So in terms of what's encumbered versus what's not encumbered, is that what you're asking me? Because, things get encumbered as we identify the projects and we hire the actual team of workers to do the building projects. That's when they get encumbered. So some things have been encumbered, some things haven't been. But is it more, might be more of a timing question?
Yeah, I guess I have to pull up the actual treasurer's report, which is the file. So how about since you didn't get a preview and I don't want to surprise you with anything, I'll just I'll resend the questions.
Sure.
To the degree that they need to be, that I'm sure, just like you did with the tax certs, it's a 2-sentence explanation.
Yeah, a lot of it needs to be determined when the things are encumbered and when they're not, so.
Okay.
And also, I just want to caution, I think there is a danger in looking at things at a month-to-month snapshot in time, as opposed to, as a year-over-year number, because obviously things change throughout the year, and then I just want to caution us that month-to-month isn't always an accurate,
100%, that's a great caution. I think, though, that it's good for people to understand in a more fluid sense how our budget works in the life industry and the challenges at different times of year that we have. So that's all I hope for our board and for the public to be enlightened about. I would never want us to be fixated on any one particular line of a month-to-month budget report.
so with that, can I get a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
So our next public meeting will be here December 17th at 7:30. And now can I get a motion to adjourn to executive session for the purpose of.
And if I could modify that.
Yeah.
Collective bargaining. I would also like to add student matters and matters pertaining to the employment.
With that modification, can I get a motion for, to adjourn to executive session?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.